one homework assignment due tonight over parts 4 and 5. And another thing I just want to point out, our first discussion is going to be due Thursday night. So just keep that in mind. You can check that out if you have a couple of minutes. It's not too bad. But yeah, if you have any questions about it, let me know. But basically the way it's going to work is you're going to answer the questions in there, and then, oh, there it is. You have to make a response for someone else before that discussion one ends. So there's sort of 2 steps to that. But yeah, let me know if anything in those instructions don't make sense. So let's take a look at what we were working on the last time with parts 4 and 5. So in parts 4 and 5, we were essentially repeating what we did in part 1, where we had some cash, we bought as many shares as we could on one date, and then we figured out what the value of those shares were worth at some point in the future. So let's remind ourselves what those initial steps were from part 1, because they haven't changed at all. So catch and purchase date, literally just type those in. Close price, I suppose this is new because we didn't do this in part 1, but you can use an X lookup here to figure out what the close price is for this particular date. But for shares, this is something we did in part 1. What we do is we figure out how many times 23.5 goes into 10,000 just by using division. And then we use the round down function to make sure that we get a whole number there and we don't have any fractional shares. And then to figure out how much money we spent, we realize that we bought 425 things. They each cost $23.50. So we multiply those together, we get our bill. And this guy is always less, slightly less than the amount of cash we started with. Although I suppose it could be equal, but that's doesn't happen too often. So all of these steps we've done before. It's the remaining steps that were actually new to part 4. And what we saw in part 4 is that when I look up this future value, now that I'm done figuring out how much I spent and stuff, I'm not going to rely on the close price anymore. I'm going to look up the 2 adjusted close prices. Once again, just use X lookup. And then based on what question we are, there's a couple that wanted to know the change, but honestly, I don't care too much about that number. This is the one I'm really interested in. I want to know the percent change between these 2 adjusted close values. So we have a quick new minus old over old there. In this case, it more than doubled. So it increased by 153%. And then to figure out the final value of the problem, this is where we take the initial value, how much we spent, we increase it by 153%, and you should get that number right there. And so now we have this really nice calculator where all I have to do is change any one of those 3 blue cells. I can change my cash, my purchase date, or my future date, and everything should update as needed. So like, for example, if I change this to the most recent trading day in the data set, we get slightly different numbers, but all the math works out because I'm using a bunch of X lookups and references, so I don't have to really do anything from scratch. It's really nice. The other part of what we were working on last time was part 5, which introduced this concept of adjusted close over close ratio. And yes, it looks like it's 1 forever, but once you make it down past 1999, where we saw that first stock split, this ratio becomes different. And one of the questions there has graph it. Graph looks like that. As you can see, it's 1 all the way until back in 1999. And then a follow-up question had us add adjusted high and adjusted low. Gave us the formula in the book, but essentially you're just taking this ratio from the first column that we added for this part and multiplying it by either the high or the low, and making a graph, not over the entire data set, but over whatever between the 2 dates that they give you. And then I suppose there are some lookup questions for those 3 columns as well. So we can build a little calculator there that does that. But that was essentially parts 4 and 5. It was adding a couple new columns and graphs, and then figuring out how to use this adjusted close stuff so that we can deal with these stock splits. Those are the two new main ideas. What we're working on today is actually pretty similar. We're working on parts 6 and 7. Let's take a look at these questions. Let's take a look at the first question. You invested $10,000 on this day. What's it worth in the future? We already know how to do this. We literally just built this calculator for part 4. So if you just change your purchase date, you should be done with this first question. As long as you were using lookups and stuff and not manually finding those prices. All you have to do is type in the new purchase date and potentially the new future date, and you should be done with this first question. So that one's not too bad. Now, in the second question, it's similar, but just slightly different. What you're going to do is start the same. So you can actually use the exact same calculator here. Take your 10,000 bucks, invest it at 98, sell it at 99. But then you're going to take those proceeds. I think it's like $50,000. So your 10,000 is going to become like 50,000. You're going to take those 50,000 and you're going to reinvest it in 2002 and then watch it grow. So essentially you're doing part 4 twice. You invest it once, watch it grow. You then take those earnings and reinvest it on a second date and watch them grow again. And these questions down here just sort of walk you through the steps again. There's maybe 1 or 2 new steps, but they're not too bad for the most part. The main idea is using that big calculator that we built for part 4 twice. In fact, you might even want to duplicate it so that you can have the separate purchases next to each other. It'll make your life easy. Now, in part 7, it's again more of the same, except now we only have $1,000, and this is what I would consider to be a much more reasonable approach to investing. People just don't have $10,000 sitting around, they invest it, and then they watch it grow for 30 years. Most people take a little bit of money each month or a little bit of money each year, and they keep investing it each year over and over again. And so it's almost like in this case, if you're doing this for 10 separate years, it's almost like you made 10 separate investments. That's a much more realistic approach to savings and watching your investments grow into the future. And that's what we're trying to calculate here. So you're going to create a table. I would use this exact same layout with these 10 different dates, and each time invest $1,000 and sort of add them all together by the end and see what these 10 separate investments are worth on the most recent trading day, that 2017 date at the top of the data set. So that's what's going on in there. You're trying to kind of figure out, how do I take all those steps and make it into a nice draggable form so I only have to do it for this top row and not repeat myself 10 times. So that's more of an Excel organizational issue than new math, because the math we've done before. Now, one little trick. Thought it said something in here. Oh, there it is. Has to deal with this question. And it says something basically like, instead of using the part 4 method where you relied on the adjusted close values, could you technically go back and be lazy and use the part 1 method and just use the close prices, which is a little bit faster? Well, look at the dates. The dates will kind of tell you if that's allowed or not. So think back to what we said yesterday. Why did we have to utilize adjusted close? Is that true here? Now, adjusted close always works, but you're potentially saying, hey, maybe I can do the quicker way here. And then you do the same thing with investing on a bunch of days in July each year. So these 2 tables in part 7 are identical. Like once you do one, you can almost copy and paste to do the second one. The main thing I would point out here is notice these dates aren't all the same. So some are January 2nd, some are January 3rd. This one's the 4th. So just be really careful when you're typing in these dates, because if you type one wrong when you go to do your X lookup, it might not find it. if you type January 2nd for every single date, and that just has to do with like weekends and that sort of stuff.